In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Your health is your greatest asset. Don't trade it for success that comes at a cost of your well-being. Welcome to a Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: mastering stress for peak performance, embracing mindfulness in leadership, and the science of laughter for healthier life. Our guest today is Professor Pete Alexander, a TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and expert in stress relief strategies. From overcoming stress-induced diabetes to leading a movement for workplace wellness, Pete's journey is a testament to the power of mindfulness, laughter, and intentional well-being. Whether it's understanding the warning signs of burnout or leveraging laughter yoga for mental resilience, Pete's insight will inspire you to take control of your stress and reclaim your energy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Professor Pete Alexander, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Sam. Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And after hearing your TED Talk, I was just very impressed and so glad to platform you. To kick us off, tell us more about stress relief tools.
Yeah, so basically, it's one of the many things that I basically do, and I got involved in working with stress relief back in 2018. I was actually working in the corporate realm, and what ended up happening was I was working on a very high-profile project, and the stress, I had not dealt with my stress very well, actually, throughout my life. I basically grew up in an extremely dysfunctional family. And when I became an adult, I hadn't learned how to deal with that stress properly. And in 2008, I ended up getting stress-induced diabetes. And a lot of people say, how can you get, I've never heard of that, stress-induced diabetes. Well, technically, it's not a direct cause. What happens is that when we are constantly stressing ourselves out, it causes cellular inflammation in our bodies. And when it goes untreated, that ends up causing chronic disease. And I had spent probably 40 years pounding myself with cortisol and adrenaline. And the weakest link in my body at that point was my pancreas. And even though diabetes doesn't run in my family, sure enough, I ended up with it myself. And I didn't take at that point to say, oh, I better take care of myself. I just said, okay, fine, give me whatever therapy I need. I don't have time to deal with this. Love that. And so 10 years go and by, and then, I'm continuing to burn the candle at both ends. And I ended up in the emergency room 1 hour from being comatose with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for the listeners who don't know what that is, basically, my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And here's the craziest thing of all. So when I went to the emergency room, they thought I was having a heart attack. They immediately admitted me. And then I was transferred to ICU. The one and only time I've ever been in ICU. I was in the ICU for several days. And on my second day in ICU, I kid you not, and you don't rest very much in the ICU. They're always poking and prodding you. And I get this text from my micromanager boss who had replaced the boss who had hired me. And on this text, it says at about 6 a.m. in the morning, you have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it? Now, mind you, my boss knew I was in the emergency room, knew that I was in ICU because my wife had texted this person. And so there I was sitting there trying to reschedule my webinar from my phone because what a surprise. I didn't have my laptop with me in the ICU. And so this nurse comes who was on call for me at that point. And when I was first admitted to the hospital, to the ICU, my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read them. All they said was high. So the lab had to manually estimate what my blood sugars were. They estimated it to be 8 to 10 times higher than normal. So when she comes over and she checks my blood, and I'm sitting there trying to reschedule the webinar, so my numbers had come down. They were more reasonable. They were still high, but they were more reasonable. The glucometers could read it. And all of a sudden, like a 90-degree angle, it skyrockets straight back up. And this nurse says to me, just a matter of factly, she says, you realize this is what put you in the hospital bed in the first place. And that was like the epiphany moment for me. My friends had told me, my family had told me I was stressing myself out and I wasn't, I was going down a very, very slippery slope. And, but it was basically a perfect stranger who had nothing, no skin in it to tell me, just said, you're basically killing yourself. And so for the next 2 days, I sat there and really thought about stuff. And I realized I was trading my health for my career. And that's a really bad trade. And so after I got out of the hospital the next day, I decided I'm going to resign. I'm going to focus on my own health for the first time in my life. And so I started experimenting with different stress relief tools and techniques. Many of them helped, some of them didn't. And what I continued to do was just focus on on that health because, I want to be around to meet my future grandchildren. So what was interesting is that my former coworkers, my friends, they all said, wow, you look like a totally different person. And here's the crazy thing. You see what I look like right now. If you were to see me in a picture of me in 2008, when I was first diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes, and you look at me now, yeah, I have a little bit more gray hair in my head, but I actually look younger than I did in 2008. That is crazy. That's what stress does to us. It ages us rapidly. So they said, you ought to write a book about this. So I decided to write the book, and it became an Amazon bestseller, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for the people it's helped.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that lengthy intro. We feature a lot of similar cases, high performing people that didn't understand just how rapidly they were going into a wall, perhaps. And it reminds me of a quote by Jim Rohn, which is "Take care of your body because it's the only place you have to live." At the end of the day, you can make more. You can make more money. You can add on different skill sets and so on. But your body is your body. You're not changing that anytime soon. Um, and I want to ask you because you talk so refinedly and perhaps accurately of that pivotal moments where when you realize that trading your health was for your career was a bad trade, which is one thing that some understand prior to doing it themselves, but there are some people like yourself, like I said, other big performers that just need to realize it once they did it themselves. It's quite atrocious, but it's just the case. It's just the case. And when you're taking yourself back to that moment, did you always knew that your lifestyle was causing that stress that would basically cause all these disease on the back end, or how would you say basically you were battling this idea of I need to do more, whatever it takes, basically is a trait I'm willing to take. Can you clarify basically working wise, just your mindset at that time?
Yeah, it's interesting because prior to getting diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes, my body was giving me all these different signs that I was stressing myself out. We get these early signs initially. It could be something like one of the most common ones is back and shoulder stiffness. And the reason that happens early on is because, especially those of us that work at a desk primarily as our work, well, when we're stressed, we don't realize it, but we tend to hunch over at our desks. And that puts a lot of pressure on our back and shoulders. So there's something, you might have something early on like that. I had that. I had frequent colds, this is well before COVID, but frequent colds where, instead of having one cold a winter season, I was getting one cold every 3, 4 weeks. It was just continuously cycling, cycling, cycling. Um, I was having trouble sleeping. So, if you find yourself either not having insomnia or sleeping too much, that could be an indicator you're physically stressed. Digestive disorders where no amount of Pepto-Bismol is helping, or you're reaching for the aspirin or Tylenol or Excedrin every day or every other day instead of occasionally because you're constantly with headaches. These are all, indicators that you're physically stressed. And the weight fluctuations. One thing I didn't mention, prior to my diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes, I lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And mind you, I was not dieting. I was eating my normal stuff. I was doing my regular exercise, nothing out of the ordinary. But all of a sudden, the weight just started coming off. And at first, I was in my mid 40s. So at first, I thought, this is fantastic. I haven't lost weight since my early 20s. That's great. And then after that 30th pound came off, I thought, oh, I better have this checked out. So the blood work came back as having diabetes. So I was getting all of these different things. And in fact, I remember when my dad he was in hospice back in 2008. That was one of the many things that I was dealing with in addition to the business and my kids being small and my marriage heading for a divorce, all these things that were just pounding on top of me. And I remember I go to visit him at the hospice and my back had given out and I couldn't stand. I couldn't sit. I was literally lying on the tile floor in his hospice room and talking to him because that was the only thing that gave me a little bit of relief. And yet, as stressed out as I was thinking, oh, okay, this is just my back. It's nothing. I'll just get through it. I'll get through it. And that's the problem that happens is those of us that are workaholics and my father, I mean, he made me a toxic perfectionist as a young adult. And I was never good enough. I was never good enough. So I constantly was striving to do better, to do better, do better. And that's the problem that we have when we're perfectionists and type A workaholics is we end up doing so much that is not healthy for ourselves. And at a certain point, the problem is that when we continuously stress ourselves out, we're dumping that adrenaline, we're dumping that cortisol into our bodies. And our bodies keep on saying, okay, you better do something about it. They keep raising the bar. And with me, it just said, you know what? Enough is enough, shutting the pancreas down. And now what happens is I've got this chronic disease that I have to deal with for the rest of my life. And it's a drag because I have to wear an insulin pump that is, yes, it helps me regulate my blood sugars, but it's also an absolute frustrating thing because it's constantly nagging me. And, if I would have focused on my health, if I would have said, okay, all these earlier signs, if I would have done something about it instead of keeping on pushing, then I wouldn't have deal with this right now. So, and that's why I do these talks, is because if I can help educate at least one person to avoid pushing themselves into the point where you can't come back from it, you have to deal with this chronic disease now, then I've done my job.
And one thing that we know more and more from just people talking about it is that it's not the stress perhaps that kills us, but it's our reaction to it very often. And you talk a lot about basically ways in which we can have stress relief, basically techniques and tools. I saw that you have basically created over 100 actually of those, which are just quick and effective ways in which you can have release some of your stress. When you're thinking about some of these strategy and just how much of them you have, which or how basically do you find the most impactful and immediate basically stress relief? Which one of those would you say is one that our audience can very, very easily and very effectively basically apply to their lives, and why perhaps would you choose that one?
Well, I would say there's a couple of them that are my favorites. Um, One, just a very simple one, is gratitude, because when we're pushing ourselves so much, a lot of the times it is because we're comparing ourselves to someone else, and we don't need to compare ourselves to someone else. It's we're unique individuals. So whatever we're doing, whatever we're accomplishing, it's up to you. And what I find is being grateful for the little things in life makes a huge difference in my overall demeanor. So yeah, you could be grateful for, okay, I'm grateful that I got this promotion, or I'm grateful because I have this house, or I'm grateful because I drive this expensive car. Let's just say those things. Well, the reality is, if we're grateful for the small things in life, so what my wife and I do every night is we have a gratitude exercise at the end of the day. And either she asks me or I ask her, what are you grateful for today? And I always start with, I'm grateful for my health, because all else is secondary. And that's number one, because health is my number one personal value now, because I lost it. And then I recap the small things that, happened to me during the day. For example, tonight, I could tell you that our conversation will be one of my gratitude exercise points, because I enjoy the conversation, and I'm grateful for that. Probably will be something about, like, I'm running a laughter yoga class later today, so it'll be just having the opportunity to bring laughter and joy to people's lives, and by recapping the small things, what we do is we attract additional positive energy towards ourselves, because we are energy. Our bodies are energy. And when we, focus on the negative, the problem is that we attract back negative. And, people say, oh, that doesn't happen. Well, okay. So a perfect example that everybody can relate to is, let's say you're running late for an appointment. So what happens when you're running late and you start stressing about it? Chances are you're going to have trouble finding your keys before you leave the house, or you're going to hit the red light, or you're going to miss that subway train, or, and those kind of things are things you're focusing on the negative, and the universe basically sends you whatever like energy you're asking for. And when you send out that you're stressed, it doesn't know positive from negative. It just knows that, oh, you want something else to continue to make you late? There you go. So when you're running late, look at how many times if you're stressed about it, how many red lights you're going to hit, how much traffic you're going to hit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you think about it from a positive standpoint, it brings that positive energy. So I like to be able to say thank you. And I've gotten used to this. It's a habit for me. Anything positive that I think of, I say thank you, thank you, thank you, because I want to attract more of that. So gratitude is one. Another one is visualizing. And this is one that the listeners can do. The only thing that I would suggest is, because it takes 1 minute, is if you're driving a vehicle, put this on pause because you're going to be closing your eyes. But let me walk you through it. So basically, go ahead and close your eyes and take a deep breath in. And I want you to go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Call it your happy place. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe it's a park. Maybe it's a lake. Maybe it's your backyard. Maybe it's the spa. Maybe it's your favorite recliner. Wherever it is, go there now and take in all of your senses. So, what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Maybe the sand or the grass under your feet? And what do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? Maybe you made popcorn for your favorite movie. And what do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and take another deep breath in and open your eyes. It's a simple grounding exercise. And, obviously not when you're driving a vehicle, but, let's say that you have an important meeting that you have to have, or a difficult conversation you have to have with someone. If you do this exercise, it helps ground you and calm you down so that you're not all wound up tight before taking on that perceived stressful activity.
Nice. No, and this is so important. Taking a moment to, and sometimes, like you said, lives makes obligated us to basically contemplate that moment of stress, right? When you're stressed, you hit more red lights. You look for your keys. It's a little bit like life and we're going to talk about laughter right after. So that's great. But it's a little bit like life is playing with you a little bit, and hopefully you take some great lessons from that, because there are great lessons from that. You mentioned being basically a certified laughter yoga leader. Now, the first time I saw that was actually in Dragon's Den, and it was a guy selling some type of a device, helping basically with laughter yoga class. Very interesting. I was always intrigued. I also saw it on many basically entertainment show. It's definitely taking off, which I think is fantastic. I'm a big fan of Charlie Chaplin, and obviously we know how big of a comedian he was, and he famously said a day without laughter is a day wasted. So it's always been basically very central to my understanding of life. Now, for you specifically, how has this practice basically changed how you and transform perhaps the way you approach stress management, both personally and professionally? Tell me more about the impact of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So laughter yoga, the interesting thing is, how great it feels when we do this hearty laughter. And the reason it feels so great is because if we laugh, whether it's a hearty laughter or even a chuckle or a giggle, as long as we do it for 5 to 6 seconds or more, our bodies automatically release positive endorphins. And that's what gives us the health benefits. And there are over 30 clinical studies all over the world that show the powerful health benefits of laughter. But here's the crazy thing. As smart as our bodies are, they don't know the difference between a real and a simulated laugh. Only knows that we're laughing. And so in laughter yoga, what we try and do is laugh at things that may not even be funny. But because we do a laugh, it releases those positive endorphins because our bodies don't know the difference between the real and the simulated laugh. But what's great about it is when we do a simulated laugh as a group, laughter is very contagious. And so as you look at somebody who's laughing, it's hard not to laugh. right? And there's I'm sure you've seen these videos where people are on a subway and somebody's looking at their screen and starts laughing, and other people are kind of looking at him and they're smiling, and then they, the next thing you know, within a few seconds, everybody in the car is laughing. And it just feels so good. So, from a stress relief standpoint, it is wonderful. And so, what I do is I teach people that when they are dealing with a particular stressful activity, one way that you can approach it is to try and laugh. And a great example of this, we were talking about, stressing about being late. Okay. So let's say you are running late and you get stopped at a light or there's traffic. Okay. Instead of going, oh, I'm going to be late, if you start laughing in your car, as odd as that feels, what'll happen is it'll start to bring the stress down. And some people say, well, wait a minute. If I start laughing in my car, people are going to think I'm crazy. No, they're not. How do they know that you're not talking to somebody on the phone, listening to a funny podcast, listening to something funny on the radio, whatever it happens to be? Don't, worry about what other people think. Just laugh. And all it takes is 5 to 6 seconds. So, a great example. I'll walk you through one that I actually did in my TED talk. I remember the TED people, the organizers, say, "Oh, no! Don't do anything that involves the audience because the cameras are only on you and the microphone is only on you, and so it's a weird thing." And I said, "No, I have to do this," and so I pushed the envelope. But what I did was I had everyone hold their hand out as if they were holding their phone, and I asked them, and for the listeners, just imagine this. Imagine you just received either a text or an email message from a person or organization that you respect. And that's a very challenging message. So whether it's something went wrong, something negative, whatever it is, take a moment and think about how that message would make you feel. And then with your other hand, point at that imaginary message, and we're going to just laugh out loud for 10 seconds, like this. Now, how do you feel? Probably lighter, less stressed, calmer. And then what it does is now you can start thinking, okay, how do I deal with that message? But that's all it takes is to just force yourself to laugh. And the crazy thing is, when we were kids, the average kid would laugh, snicker, smile 100 times a day. But as adults, when we have all these responsibilities, we're lucky if we smile, giggle, laugh 5 times a day. Only, and that's lucky. That's more than most people. So adding in a laughter here and there makes all the difference in the world. It really does. And, it's just, some people say, well, I have to put on a video to laugh. Sure. I mean, whatever works for you. If it's, just try it. And the other thing to keep in mind is, and I always tell new people who come into the class, it's going to feel awkward at first. And the reason being is because we as adults are taught, we only laugh if there's something funny to laugh at. Why do we laugh just to laugh? That makes no sense. So you have to get out of your head, as well as I'll get people who will come to class and go, oh, I can't laugh as good as that person. It's like, it's not a competition. It's, it's just laugh, whatever, whether you want to laugh or not, just participate, as much or as little as you want, and that's the funny thing. So I always say, yes, I am a professor. No, I'm not grading your laughter.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting, even the thoughts of the stress of thinking, well, I don't laugh as well as that other person. I think that just shows how deep we are into this performing mindsets. And one thing that was interesting about your story was improv comedy. You seem to be fascinated with basically not only laughing but also just being a jokester a little bit, which is great. When did that love begin for you? Was that a specific moment that you just fall in love with comedy?
It's interesting. It actually started as a child. Um, when you grow up in a very dysfunctional family, you take on roles. And my first role was hero. Basically, I want to accomplish things. So that was that, perfectionist person. But then I realized in my 20s that uh, being a perfectionist, I was not a likable person. I was too serious. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start bringing some humor into it just because I wanted to. And so I started becoming a practical joker. And so on April Fool's Day, I was, it was a field day for me. I would play jokes on people, left and right. And then it just was, I started learning how to make people laugh without playing jokes on them. And then I started having a lot more fun at that. And people realized that, oh my gosh, this guy is actually pretty funny. In fact, my stepdad, I don't know if you know what vaudeville was, but my stepdad was, so vaudeville was back in the before TV, in the 1920s and 30s. It was live stage, and they would do, the performers would do a lot of comedy routines, etc. And my stepfather was a child vaudeville star, so he passed on over 100 jokes to me, and I've added to that list over the years, which I passed on to my kids. And so jokes became a real fun thing for me because when, basically I recall the jokes based on a particular keyword phrase. It's not like I sit there and I couldn't stand up on stage and say, okay, I'm going to just tell you joke after joke after joke after joke. I don't do that. But if we're having a conversation and something comes up and I think about a joke, I'll go ahead and tell it. Well, that is great until people have heard your jokes. So, I just happened to start. So I took an improv class back 15 years ago, I think it was, in San Francisco, and I really enjoyed it. But I never thought that I would actually perform it on stage. And then what ended up happening was I happened to see a something on the community calendar about a group that was doing an improv show. And I thought, okay, I'll go watch that because I love improv. Because I've attended Second City shows several times when I was in Chicago, and I just absolutely love it. And so I happened to show up, and they I thought it was a show. It was actually just a practice. And they said, sure, if you want to practice with us. And I started practicing with them. They said, oh, you've got a knack for this. Would you like to join us and be on stage? And I thought, sure, why not? And so for the last 6 years, I've been doing that and traveling around, the regional area, doing shows every, a couple times a month. And what I find is so great about improv, you know, and this goes against my perfectionist personality, is that it's totally okay to bomb on stage. It's totally okay. And in fact, if you make a mistake on stage, it's usually more funny for the audience. So, and that just basically gives me this freedom that is so wonderful, because I compare it to when I did my TEDx. My TEDx, I had to memorize word for word that 10-minute presentation. Everything had to be perfect. And, I've given presentations, hundreds of presentations over the years. And I always was using improv without even realizing it, because I would have, I'd be on a particular part of my presentation and somebody might say something from the audience and I would respond to it. Well, in a TEDx, absolutely not. You just stick to the script. And that was hard. But to be able to have improv where you go up there and, literally, I will come up on stage and I may not have any idea what's coming out of my mouth until I actually am ready to talk. And I just trust that I'll say something and it'll be funny. And if it's not, oh, well, it'll be something else. And I've had some just, it's funny because there's times where I'll say something that I think was absolutely hysterical and there'll be crickets in the audience. And then I'll say something that wasn't okay and people will roar with laughter. So you never know. And you just have to live off of the audience's reaction. And you're the people on stage with you. That's the key part is you have to make sure you support your cast members and they support you.
Yes, and it reminds me of this. I won't name him by name, but I went to Scottsdale, Arizona for a very big party, and it was a couple of 8,000 companies, a couple of Fortune 500 companies, basically leaders there, and one of the most anticipated leaders came on stage, visibly unscripted, but he had a very hard time being on stage, which we didn't know basically prior to this. He's an introvert, right? He doesn't like to be on stage. He decided to go for it anyways, but you can see that every 4 or 5 words, a sentence was just basically completely going out of his head, and he was just basically in a state of paralysis, perhaps the best way I can describe it. But the interesting thing is, because we all like the guy, he's a very, very cherishable person, we all laugh with him, right? Because he was laughing at himself, and we're laughing basically back to that situations. But one thing I found is, and obviously my company deals a lot with neuroscience, is what we found though is it makes things very memorable. When I was going around the room at the end, when everybody was speaking, and I asked them, hey, who was your favorite or some presentation you remember? And his name always came up, even though his presentation was, technically speaking, very, very poorly, basically executed. Which actually that changed my perceptions of not only life but communication altogether. Because I said, well, the content and the substance of what you have to say is obviously very important, especially if you're a speaker, but also the resilience and the ability to coming on the other side, even though if you had a poor performance, just technically speaking, and saying, you know what, look, that's not my thing, but I embrace it, and I still have a great product, and people love it, and they still love me, even though I can go on stage in front of thousands of people. I think there's beauty and novelty in this concept of not only understanding who you are, but your strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would add to it that having that vulnerability on stage is really because that allows you to connect with your audience more. And so when you're perfectly scripted, it's kind of like, I would say it's more like an advertisement, because it's been shot, you've practiced it, like for example, with my TEDx, I must have practiced it, at least 300-400 times. And so, and I still, I'm flubbed one thing in that talk with even 300-400 practices. But when you're on stage and some thought happens or you share something that is personal, then you have an opportunity to connect with the audience on a more real manner. And, I spent over 30 years in a 12-step program recovering from the family dysfunction. And I used to talk about some of the things that happened to me as a kid. And when I started sharing that in larger public audiences, it's amazing how people came up after me because I didn't script it. I just talked about it. And, they could see how much it affected me when I talked about it because, I was wearing my emotions, you know, uh, on my sleeve. And so it just, if you are willing to connect with the audience and not just, step back and just say, okay, I have this facade of professionalism and I'm only going to give this presentation exactly as it is. You have to be able to do some improvisation and really, unless of course it's a TEDx, but if you're in front of an audience, that's that. I always love to, I'll tell a joke to the audience if somebody says something and it spurs that keyword phrase, like I mentioned earlier. I'll tell the joke. I have to process it really fast because I think, okay, I just thought of this joke. Is this an appropriate joke to tell? Because that's the other thing. If it's a dirty joke that some people might take offense to, of course I'm not going to tell it. So, but you just have to be willing to be there and be vulnerable, and you'll connect with the audience members so much more.
Yes, and authenticity, vulnerabilities, those are keywords and a little bit of buzzwords, but they're buzzwords for a good reason. They're so crucial, and I love this thought as well, which I don't recall who it was, but it was this thought of who you truly are is not who you think you are. It's not even who basically you think I am. It's who I think you think that I am. It's this third person basically worldview where you embody who basically you think other people see you as, which is quite exceptional. And like I said, I don't recall the author of that quote, but it always struck me as being so incredibly not only complex, just philosophically speaking, but so intrinsically true. And I think that one thing that struck me with you is even though that you consider yourself a more serious person, you seem to have find your ways and let your authenticity basically shine through. I suppose how was it for you specifically to have a dysfunctional home and then basically playing these characters and then basically I think facing some health issues and some micromanagers? How did you basically I suppose came to the conclusion or came in harmony with the authenticity that was always within you, but you were able to let it shine through? Was that any kind of like pivotal moments you can you think walk us through?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, growing up in a dysfunctional family, the as a teenager, I learned very good to try and hide what was going on. So, for lack of a better term, I became a very good liar to my friends. And so I'll give you a few examples. Like, so back, when I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones, so we just had those the regular phones in the house. And my mom and stepfather, they basically prioritized alcohol and cigarettes over food and paying bills. So often things like the phone would get disconnected. And I would have a friend who would call me because they knew my home number and they couldn't get through. Well, instead of me saying to my friends, "Oh yeah, my mom and stepfather, were drinking the and smoking the money away, and that's why we didn't pay the phone bill," I would say, "Oh yeah, either I or my mom tripped over the phone and pulled the cable out of the wall, and that's why when you called you couldn't get through." Complete lie like that, but because I was trying to avoid the pity and avoid the embarrassment. Another one I remember is bringing somebody home from school, and my stepfather was passed out on the couch as you walk in the front door, and he's snoring up a storm because as he was only like 135, 140 pounds, 5'10", but he could drink one of those 2-liter bourbons or vodkas overnight. That's where he was getting his, I guess, nutrients, was because he barely ate anything, but he drank like crazy. So there he was, passed out on the couch, snoring up a storm. What would I say? Oh, you know what? He was working late last night and blah, blah, blah. I was making all these blasted excuses. Well, once I got into the 12-step program, and that was back in 1990, I realized that I was basically hiding what was going on. And I became very, very good at that. And in order to recover, part of what I had to recover with was to be okay with what happened to me and be okay sharing what happened to me and not worrying about someone judging me for what I was exposed to. And so that turning point happened when I was basically 25. And I'm grateful for what I learned in that program. In fact, I truly believe that the 12-step program, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, saved my life. Because before I walked in there, I was a very angry person. I was on a road to self-destruction because I just didn't like life. And the program not only taught me to like myself, but it also taught me to love myself. And that was a key turning point in my life. And, I've given back so much back to the program, but as much as I've given to the program in terms of sponsoring things and people and organizing retreats and all this stuff, to me, it'll never be enough because I owe that program my life.
Beautiful. And you seem to have grown up to be a very mindful person. You're someone that seems to have basically part its past a little bit, but also I think, or at least that's how I feel, truly embrace the present as obviously your past made you who you are. And I think it's quite lovely to see when you're thinking about your work that you do with leaders. I want to bring it to some of what you're currently doing. Leveraging mindfulness in leadership seems to be very, very important for you. And I suppose it's something that you talk a lot about. And can you tell us more about what role do you think mindfulness plays specifically in leaderships and business developments, or even culture development to a certain extent? And perhaps how can leaders integrate some of those tips and some of your work into their daily lives to increase their impact and hopefully embrace a more healthier and pure culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I would highly recommend, if listeners have never done this, is first and foremost, professionally elicit your personal values. And the reason I say that is because our personal values are what's important to us, how we evaluate our time, and how we spend our time. And when, we can assume that we know what our personal values are. And yeah, I would imagine that you'd be fair, you get a few of them right. But the problem is that we probably have personal values that are because we feel like, oh, I ought to have this personal value, or someone told me I'm supposed to have this personal value. But if you take 10, 15 minutes to do this activity and you do it in a place where you have no distractions, so your phone is off, your computer's off, and it's just you and a pen and a piece of paper, you will find that there's going to be a personal value, a very important personal value that'll come out that'll likely surprise you. And the reason why you want to do this activity is because if you determine what your, let's say, top 5 personal values are, those typically will not change. At least, let's say if you have 5, 4 out of the 5 will not change throughout your life. They really won't, because no matter what happens to you, yes, one will likely change. And that one that likely will change is if you don't have health as part of your personal values. And the reason is because we take our health for granted, as did I when I was younger. But so that one might bump, if something happens to you, that might bump. Because, when I did my personal values, I was originally trained in this back in the early 1990s, and health was not one of my top five values. It wasn't, but it's number one on my list now. So, but when you have your personal values there, what that does is that gives you your North Star. And whenever you have an important decision you need to make, if you run that decision by your top five values, let's say, you want to make sure that that decision is in alignment with each of those values. Because if it's not, I guarantee you, you'll add additional stress to yourself because you're not being true to yourself. That's who you are. And so I have we could share with the audience. I have a link to a free video where it can walk you through how to do it. You just have to make sure to be in like I said, a space where you can have zero distractions, because if you get distracted, it won't work. So, but it only takes, like I said, 10, 15 minutes.
It's incredible. One of my favorite book of all time is Atomic Habits. And what I saw in life, not only in professional and personal life, is there's these very, very small, or some will even call them futile until you understand the importance of them, actions and basically ways, even ways of thinking, maybe not even a passive action, as I like to call them, but that are so important and added on top of each other makes you basically a fuller person. I think we tend to, especially in Western culture, we tend to see ourselves as many, many persona. There's Sam at work, there's Sam at home, there's Sam when he plays, there's Sam in love. And truly, no, you're just Sam. Those are just different, basically, pillars of Sam. But all those basically makes who Sam is and who obviously Pete Alexander is. And that concept of being a full human is something that I was even myself battling with as a very young child, and basically ambitious professionals. Your life is changing rapidly, and sometimes you tend to lose yourself within this process. And mindfulness is truly, it isn't difficult. You just need to remember to do it, perhaps. And those are very, very powerful thoughts, in which I'm sure our audience will be able to digest and incubate. Something that was striking to me also was just how much you talk about, we talk wellness, and you talk about health specifically. So that's a little bit of a synonym, even though I think wellness is a little bit more kind of like in grander scales. You're obviously the president of Office Plans by Everything Grows, which is fantastic. And I was able to watch some of your stuff there, and I was quite impressed with everything. And you truly enhance basically workplace environments and by reducing stress and boosting productivity. You give some stats also, a Gallup poll that talks about that quite at length, which we will link in the description of this podcast. But what insights perhaps have you gained from getting in creating wellness oriented workspaces, and how does those, I suppose, plans contribute to employees' well-being? Just tell me kind of like the depth and I suppose thoughtfulness behind all of that.
Yeah, it's so we as humans, we're drawn to nature. So I always recommend to people, if they can get out for a quick walk in nature, it's fantastic. Now, some of us work in the city and live in the city, but there's usually a small park somewhere, or at least a tree or two. Get around that tree. You don't have to be a tree hugger. You don't have to hug the tree, but if there's some dirt, let's say, take your shoes and socks off and put your feet in that dirt. Connect with that nature. Because we as humans, we are connected to nature. And in an environment inside office buildings where, you've got a lot of fluorescent lighting and a lot of stress, obviously, if you can bring real plants in, you can bring that nature indoors and connect with it. And what's crazy about this, the clinical studies do show that not only do live plants, not fake plants, because fake plants may look pretty, but they have no health benefits. In fact, they're just dust collectors. That's all they are. Um, but if you have real plants in your environment, not only does it reduce the stress, because when we're around nature, we intrinsically and subconsciously reduce our stress. But also, if you have the proper plants in the office environment, what it does is it cleanses the air, because that's what trees, that's what plants do. And so if you can have these live plants in strategic places, not only are you going to reduce the stress of those working there, but they tend to be more healthy, because it's the plants are actually taking the toxified air and cleaning it. So the health benefits, not only from the stress, but also physical health benefits, you're going to have people who are not going to call in sick as often. So what's crazy about these plants is that if they are maintained properly and you have the right plants in place, it's amazing the ROI that you can get from having those plants in the office environments. It's just it's amazing, and we provide the clinical evidence to customers who want that as to back up having the plants in there, because a lot of times the people think, oh, okay, all you have to do is water them. No, it's not just that. There's actually a lot to do with taking care of the plants, because plants don't naturally grow indoors. Live plants are not supposed to be indoors. So you have to manage them properly and grow them properly and nurture them properly. And that's why we have a business, because if it was that easy to keep plants alive indoors, you wouldn't need a plant business.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we talk about this concept of nature quite often also, and I think the reason why is because everything is interconnected. At the end of the day, and that's something that everybody should I think reunite with this understanding of, yes, there's definitely a hierarchy of life when it comes to morals. Sure, we can talk about that and how it's derived from God and so on. But at the end of the day, from all human history and all cultures, all respectful and moral cultures, understood the necessity and the grandiosity as well of being one with nature, of connecting basically back with your roots. And even Lao Tzu, for example, which is one of my favorite philosophers of all time, talks about this at very great length. And we can truly, and specifically in stress management, I think we can get some incredible insights from nature. One of those is, in nature, everything is done, yet nothing is rushed, right? It's everything seems to be falling in place. The ecosystems, even if it's disturbed heavily, specifically with human beings and other sorts of basically energy, always seem to be just right at the right place, just right there, and right in greatly basically intertwined. And it's quite beautiful. And I think that there's both tangible and intangible basically insight we can get from nature. Now, you're talking about walking in nature, or getting basically yourself closer to nature. Let's say that typical office, I don't want to give some measurements here, but just thinking about a typical cubicles. What's typically your best strategy basically to incorporate some of these plants? Is it one on the side of your office? How big does it need to be, or at least does that make any difference? Educate me perhaps on how we can do that effectively.
Sure. Obviously it depends on what the scenario is in the office. But in a cubicle type scenario, you're going to have, let's say, 6, 8, 10, 12 cubicles all connected together. One of the easiest ways to do that is to have a planter box on top that's secured so it doesn't fall on somebody. And those would be with, let's say, some golden pothos. Those kind of look like ivy almost. And so those are very small plants, but they are close to the employees to help cleanse the air. Another one, and one of the most effective ones that people can have, and you can have these strategically placed. Let's say if it's in an office, somebody who has an office, if you have a large sansevieria, which is it's also been called a snake plant or a mother's tongue plant. If you have a large sansevieria in an office, let's say a 10 by 10 office, that's going to be enough to keep the air cleansed in that office. So it all comes down to when we go in there, we design the plant locations. We actually take pictures of the office environment, and we actually we use software to be able to place the plants in the containers so people could see what it was going to look like. But we base it on not trying to put an overabundance of plants, because while it's still very healthy, if you put an overabundance of plants and then all of a sudden the environment's going to get a little bit more humid. And so, because the plants actually bring, the humidity into it. So it's a fine balance. And we also have to watch out for people who bring in personal plants. And what ends up happening is often somebody will bring a plant in that might have gnats. And well, those gnats travel from plant to plant. So we have to figure out if somebody complains because, let's say, a gnat goes and it'll go right, it's attracted to light. And so it'll go on somebody's computer monitor. That's not something that, it's distracting, obviously, to someone. So we've had to identify personal plants that are full of gnats and have them remove them, because our plants, are going to get attracted to these gnats too. But we have ways to remove the gnats from our plants. But we have to make sure that the employee who brought a infested plant in, that's got to go too. So, but in terms of numbers, if you think about it, a plant that's got a container, a 10 or a 12-inch container, one per 10 by 10 office, or if we're talking about in meters, 3 by 3 meters.
Sure. Okay, so the one plant strategically placed is typically enough to make a big difference.
Yes, as long as it's a fairly large plant, because if it was, I was mentioning the golden pothos before, those come in a very small container. So if you had one office and you only had one little plant in there, it's not going to be enough. But you have one larger plant that's a floor plant. Let's say a floor plant. Yes, one per office would be just fine.
Lovely, love it. And in one thing was also very, very intriguing is obviously you seem to have fallen in love with writing. You have now many books under your belts, and I had a chance to review actually the Kindle version of Light in Your Day, which was quite interesting. I think perfectly tied up to our conversations. It truly, for me at least, was very empowering, basically, because it creates a sustainable approach to stress relief and well-being in general. I was thinking, perhaps when you're thinking of everything you did, right, from a quite a tough childhood in your words, to obviously being an employee that was perhaps taken for granted, and going to the emergency rooms and chronic disease and so on. Now, obviously, you have a TED Talk, of a thriving, basically, community of laughing and also improv comedy, and now writing also multiple books. What type of legacy do you hope to live for those striving to live a life, I wouldn't say stress-free, but at least less stressed, and truly, perhaps, how does that embed to what is a meaningful living in your opinion?
Well, it's interesting. I remember years ago, I was asked, what would I like on my tombstone?
Right.
And that's actually, one of the activities that I suggest people do in the book is to write your obituary. And, because an activity like that is something that really puts things in perspective about what's important to you. And part of that activity is one where you write the obituary first about everybody that would be in attendance at your funeral. And then you rewrite it with the focus on who's sitting in the first row. So if you think about that. But when someone asked me what I would like on my tombstone, I thought about it and I said, well, he made a positive difference. And that really has been my mantra that I've had, all along. People say, I want to make a difference. Well, yeah, a difference. Well, you can make either a positive or a negative difference, depending on what you're doing, right? So I want to make a positive difference. And that's, when it's all said and done, did I help somebody laugh more? Did I help somebody achieve what they wanted more? Did I help someone stress less? Whatever it happens to be. If I made the positive difference on there, then it made the difference that I wanted to make. And that's really what I when I'm all said and done, I hope if I'm on my deathbed, then I think, yeah, I accomplished my goal.
Beautiful. Do not take life too seriously. You will never get out of it alive. Mr.
Right.
Professor Pete Alexander, thank you so much for being on the Meaningful Podcast. So many great insights, and it was truly lovely to dive deeper into some of the most meaningful concepts that you were working on, and to just end us with some words of wisdom would be really, really appreciates. The floor is yours.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I would say for the listeners, the one bit of advice that I would give is don't trade your health for your career. That's a very bad trade.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.